Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly into ancient Egypt. You're standing beneath a velvet black sky pricked with stars, the air still warm from a sun that seems never to quit. Sand shifts under your sandals, and the faint rush of the Nile makes a background hum, nature's white noise machine. The pyramids loom in the distance, but tonight we won't be climbing those impossible slopes or peeking into cursed tombs. No, tonight we're focusing on something much smaller, much sillier, and, oddly enough, much more human. We're talking about the invention of the very first breath mints. Yes, the people who wrapped their kings in gold and linen also cared deeply about garlic breath. You probably won't survive this desert heat without a water bottle, let alone fit in with the locals, but at least you'll know their secret trick to smelling socially acceptable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the time where you're watching, whether it's midnight in Minnesota or early morning in Mumbai. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly along a dusty path that edges the riverbank. The smell of mud and reeds mixes with something spicier, cinnamon perhaps, though it feels out of place in the middle of a marsh. Ancient Egypt is a land of paradoxes. Stone tombs that will outlast empires, and yet daily worries that feel oddly modern. Picture a fisherman hauling in Nile perch. He's sweaty, his teeth not exactly dentist-approved, and when he goes to greet a priest, there's a social hurdle. No one likes the smell of fish breath, not even in 1500 BCE. This is why the Egyptians, masters of perfumes, oils, and incense, also dabbled in little nuggets of sweetness designed to mask the less glamorous realities of human existence. Historians still argue whether these concoctions should be called medicine, candy, or pure social armor. But either way, they tell you something important. Fresh breath mattered. Think about it. These were people obsessed with order, balance, and harmony. They painted their gods in symmetrical poses, aligned pyramids with the stars, and even organized their daily routines around the steady flooding of the Nile. Against that backdrop, bad breath wasn't just a nuisance, it was a disruption of cosmic balance. Imagine leaning in to whisper a prayer to Osiris, only to gag halfway through because your mouth smelled like old onions. Not very sacred. The mainstream fact you can lean on here is simple. Egyptian texts from as early as the Middle Kingdom mention mixtures of honey and herbs for freshening the mouth. That's your evidence of early breath mints. But here's the quirky tidbit. One recipe supposedly included frankincense and cinnamon bound together with honey rolled into small pellets, basically the world's first Tic Tacs, except stickier. And here's your debate phrase for the night. Historians still argue whether these pellets were chewed daily, reserved for ritual, or used mostly as a cure for bad breath linked to stomach ailments. After all, Egyptian medicine liked to blur the lines between what we'd call practical and magical. Picture yourself now inside a modest mud brick home, lanterns flickering, the smell of stewed lentils hanging heavy in the air. A mother kneads dough for tomorrow's bread, her children squabbling over who gets the corner seat near the fire. And on the shelf in the corner, a tiny jar of sticky spheres. They're not snacks for kids, they're carefully rolled breath mints meant for father when he goes to the temple tomorrow. Practical, yes, but also a little ceremonial. You take one, cautiously. It's gritty, uneven, and tastes strange. Sweet, yes, thanks to honey. Spicy too. Cinnamon, if you're lucky enough to afford it, though more often it might be a local herb. And faintly smoky, because resins like frankincense don't exactly dissolve cleanly in your mouth. Modern gum might win on flavor, but these little nuggets were doing their job 4,000 years ago. And here's your first joke tonight. Imagine an ancient Egyptian chewing away awkwardly, trying to impress someone at a banquet when a resin chunk gets stuck between his teeth. Ancient problem? No floss. Modern solution? Still no one carries floss. The Nile drifts by, crocodiles lurking just beneath the surface. Somewhere upriver, traders are bringing cinnamon all the way from South Asia, proof that people will go to extraordinary lengths to not smell like yesterday's dinner. The world is wide, the desert's endless, and yet in the palm of your hand sits a tiny ball of honey and spice, a symbol of how deeply people have always cared about the small comforts. You close your eyes. The scent of incense wafts from a nearby temple, mingling with the minty spice aroma of those ancient pellets. Your breath feels fresher already, though it's probably just your imagination. Still, in the middle of a land obsessed with eternity, it's funny how much detail was lavished on something as fleeting as a single exhale. You're still lingering on the riverbank, but the night has deepened and the stars look sharper now, like someone polished the sky while you weren't looking. As you stroll toward the bustle of a nearby settlement, you start to notice how much emphasis people here place on presentation. Robes pressed as neatly as linen can allow, wigs carefully scented with oils, and, most importantly for our journey tonight, a rather invisible detail, their breath. You might think, really? Breath? Wasn't survival more pressing than smelling nice? But that's exactly where you'd be mistaken. For Egyptians, daily survival and spiritual survival were intertwined. To them, cleanliness and good smells weren't luxuries, they were moral duties, little markers of respect toward others and the gods. Step into a temple precinct and you'll see. Priests wash multiple times a day, shave their entire bodies to maintain ritual purity, and burn incense constantly. You're expected to bring offerings, bow deeply, and yes, speak your prayers. Imagine doing that while reeking of yesterday's onions and beer. Awkward. The mainstream historical fact here, Egyptian etiquette demanded freshness. In fact, in some inscriptions, sweet breath is described as a sign of favor from the gods themselves. It wasn't just about social life, it was practically a divine endorsement. Now, picture yourself wandering into the courtyard of a temple in Thebes. Torches flicker, priests glide about in white linen, and incense coils upward like silk ribbons into the sky. Everyone is speaking softly, reverently, and there you are, edging into the crowd. Someone turns to greet you. You can almost feel the tension because if your breath smells like last night's fish stew, you've ruined the atmosphere. Imagine walking into a yoga class today while holding a bag of fried onions. Same vibe. So you see, fresh breath wasn't just an afterthought, it was a requirement for ritual space, much like removing your shoes before entering certain sacred places today. The Egyptians, with their meticulous obsession for order, what they called ma'at, extended it to their mouths. Harmony had to flow from your words, your gestures, and, apparently, your exhalations. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some records suggest that Egyptians even considered bad breath a symptom of disharmony in the soul. Not just a dental problem, but a cosmic imbalance. So chewing one of those sticky pellets wasn't only about courtesy, it might have been about aligning yourself with the universe. You can laugh, but admit it, you've chewed gum before an odd job interview, not just to keep from offending, but because it made you feel more put together. Same principle, just a 4,000-year head start. Now, historians still argue whether mints were common among everyday farmers and fishermen, or reserved for elites attending temple rituals and court banquets. Was it something every household whipped up with honey and herbs, or a privilege of those who could afford imported spices like cinnamon? The papyri are frustratingly vague, leaving you to imagine both scenarios. A humble farmer sucking on a honey pellet before talking to the village headman, or a noblewoman casually popping one before dancing at a feast. And speaking of feasts, imagine the spread. Roasted goose, figs, beer brewed thick as porridge, onions piled high, garlic chopped into sauces. Delicious? Absolutely. But breath-wise, a disaster. The banquet hall is echoing with laughter, heart music trickles in from the corner, and everyone is leaning close to whisper juicy gossip about Pharaoh's latest decree. Without mints, the room would smell like a middle school cafeteria after taco day. Here's joke number 1 for this section.
You picture yourself as the lone guest who forgot their breath mint, trying desperately to breathe only through your nose all night. Not exactly graceful. Joke number 2 sneaks in with the priests. Imagine one leaning close to bless you, muttering a sacred formula, only for you to catch a whiff of yesterday's garlic stew. Suddenly, the godly experience feels a little less divine. And joke number 3, fast forward to today, where even with toothpaste and mouthwash, people still keep mints handy before dates. Egyptians just got there first. They basically invented fresh breath insurance. The air in the temple grows heavier with incense, almost sweet enough to choke on. And you realize this was half the trick. Incense masked unpleasant smells everywhere, temples, homes, and tombs alike. But incense alone wasn't enough. That's why they turned to something portable, something you could tuck into a jar or slip into your hand before a meeting with someone important. And so as you wander out of the temple and back into the night, you understand. Breath wasn't just air here. It was life. It was spirit. And it was etiquette rolled into one. Sweeten your words, sweeten your breath. That was the Egyptian way.
The path out of the temple leads you toward a quieter quarter of the city, where workshops huddled together like sleepy neighbors. You duck into one that smells unlike any other, a pungent cocktail of honey, resin, and something you can't quite place. Welcome to the Egyptian apothecary, or perhaps you might call it a kitchen of mysteries, where the earliest breath mints are being born. On the shelves are clay jars with faded markings, bundles of dried herbs tied with reed string, and bowls sticky with half-finished mixtures. You can almost hear the scrape of pestles grinding against stone, the low hum of workers chanting to keep rhythm. Tonight, you're about to meet the ingredients that made Egyptian mouths more tolerable. The mainstream historical fact is this. Surviving medical papyri describe recipes for freshening the mouth using honey mixed with fragrant spices and resins. Honey wasn't just for flavor, it was a preservative, sticky enough to bind everything together into chewable pellets. But here comes the quirky tidbit. One recipe suggests cinnamon, cardamom, and frankincense bound in honey. Sounds delicious, right? Except cinnamon and cardamom weren't local. They came from as far away as South or Southeast Asia, traveling through endless trade routes. In other words, the Egyptians' obsession with fresh breath may have sparked one of the earliest examples of long-distance grocery shopping. Now, historians still argue whether some of the more bizarre ingredients were actually used. Crocodile dung, for instance, shows up in lists of substances for cosmetics and even birth control. Some researchers wonder if it ever slipped into recipes for oral remedies, though others think that's just a scribal confusion. So, no, you're probably safe from dung-flavored Tic Tacs. Probably. Imagine the scene. A young apprentice is tasked with measuring out herbs. He sneezes dramatically as the cinnamon dust tickles his nose, and his teacher scolds him, warning not to waste such precious spice. The boy mutters something under his breath, ironically needing a mint himself. The workshop buzzes with energy. A woman carefully warms honey over a small brazier until it loosens, golden and glossy, before pouring it into a stone mortar. She sprinkles in ground cardamom, adds a lump of frankincense resin, and begins to pound with steady rhythm. The mixture grows fragrant, filling the space with a sweetness that clings to your clothes. And here's your first joke of the night. Imagine this sticky paste ending up not in someone's mouth, but in their hair by accident. Congratulations, you've just invented the world's first accidental candy-scented gel. Now, think about how exotic this all felt in ancient times. Honey wasn't rare, but pairing it with imported spices was a luxury. When you hold one of these finished pellets, you're not just holding a mouth freshener, you're holding proof of a civilization that reached across deserts and seas to satisfy even its smallest comforts.
It's like if someone in your neighborhood imported rare Himalayan mint leaves just for their chewing gum. Second joke. Somewhere, surely, a thrifty Egyptian grumbled, "Why waste precious cinnamon on your mouth when we could burn it for the gods?" Priorities are always up for debate. You step back and notice the jars lining the walls, some labeled with hieratic scrawls too quick for your tired eyes to decipher. Are they recipes, shopping lists, or warnings not to mistake this mixture for face paint? Historians still argue whether the recipes in medical papyri were practical directions for daily use, or more like symbolic charms meant to combine magical properties. The ambiguity leaves you in limbo, unsure whether to swallow or spit. Another scent drifts through the doorway, garlic roasting on an open hearth nearby. You suddenly understand why breath mints were so necessary. In a cuisine dominated by onions, garlic, and fish, people weren't leaving their social impressions to chance. And joke number 3 for this section. Imagine a jealous neighbor spreading rumors, whispering, "Oh, she clearly didn't chew her frankincense ball today." The first example of mint shaming in history. As you leave the workshop, your fingers feel tacky with honey, your nose tingles with spice, and your imagination is wide awake. These odd ingredients, measured and mashed together, reveal something oddly charming. Ancient people wanted the same thing you do before a date or a meeting, that quiet confidence of not breathing last night's dinner into someone else's face. The streets outside are hushed now, torches flickering low, the smell of incense and cooking fires lingering in the air. Somewhere in those clay jars lies the first recipe for sweetness on the breath. And as you stroll away, you can't help but think, it's both strange and soothing that such small details mattered so much, even in a world of pyramids, gods, and empires.
You wander deeper into the workshop district, the sound of pestles and grinding stones echoing faintly through the night. A small doorway beckons you inside, and there you find another group at work. Not farmers or priests this time, but craftsmen who treat every ingredient like it's a sacred offering. The room is warm, filled with the dull thud of tools, and a faint shimmer of candlelight glints off jars of resin. Here, you finally see how those peculiar Egyptian breath mints were actually made. On a broad stone slab lies a neat pile of ingredients: lumps of frankincense resin, small sticks of cinnamon, sprigs of mint-like herbs, and a jar of golden honey that catches the light like captured sunlight. A man kneels with a heavy pestle, grinding spices into fine powder. The motion is slow and deliberate, like kneading dough. And you realize that half the battle was simply patience. The mainstream fact here? Egyptian workshops relied on grinding stones and mortars to break down herbs and resins, often the same tools used for cosmetics and medicines. There wasn't a special breath mint machine, just the timeless pairing of stone and muscle. The quirky tidbit? Some records suggest that frankincense was so tough it needed to be softened with wine or warmed over coals before pounding. You imagine the craftsman sipping a little on the side. Quality control, of course. Historians still argue whether these mixtures were strictly medicinal or whether Egyptians saw them as halfway between food and cure. Some papyri call them remedies for foul breath, while others list them under ritual offerings, suggesting that chewing them may have been a way to honor the gods as well as freshen the mouth. The line between snack and spell was blurry. Watch now as the honey is poured slowly into the stone bowl. It pools thick and sticky, clinging stubbornly to the sides. Powdered cinnamon is sprinkled in, dark flecks vanishing into gold. The craftsman stirs with a wooden stick, then switches to his hands, kneading the mixture like clay. You can almost feel it stretching and tugging at his fingers. Sweet, but resistant, the way modern caramel sticks to your teeth. And here's your first joke. Picture the poor apprentice stuck with the cleanup job, scraping hardened honey off the stone slab at the end of the day. World's first dishwasher and still no tips. The air is heavy with spice. It clings to your clothes, sneaks into your lungs, and makes your stomach growl. But no one's eating these little nuggets just yet. They need to be shaped. A line of apprentices begins rolling the sticky mixture into rough spheres, some large, some small, depending on the batch. They're not uniform like your neatly pressed modern candies. Each one is unique, a bit lopsided, almost charming in its imperfection. Second joke of the night? Imagine buying a bag of these at a marketplace, only to find that half are marble-sized, while the others look like squashed pancakes. Ancient Egyptian fun size, whether you wanted it or not. As the pellets dry on clay trays, you notice how carefully they're handled. They're set in rows, not unlike an army on parade, each ball destined for a mouth, a prayer, or perhaps a noble banquet. The longer they sit, the firmer they become, honey crystallizing just enough to keep them solid. But here's a curious thought. Did people actually chew these, or were they more like lozenges to suck slowly? Historians still argue over this detail, pointing out that resins don't exactly taste delightful when bitten into. Maybe Egyptians simply let the sweetness melt gradually, a slow release of honey and spice, as they whispered their words into sacred halls. Third joke of the night? Imagine someone getting impatient, biting down hard, and suddenly realizing they've just chipped a tooth on a resin chunk. Congratulations, you now need the world's first dentist. The workshop falls quiet as the trays are set aside, the mixture ready to harden overnight. Outside, the desert air cools, carrying the smell of honey and spice into the streets. Children peer in curious, but kept at bay. The pellets aren't for them, not yet. They belong to adults with rituals to uphold and reputations to maintain. You step outside, brushing sticky dust off your hands, and the sound of the Nile drifts back into your ears. Somewhere, in a small jar tucked onto a shelf, lies a batch of fresh breath mints cooling in the night. Tomorrow, they'll be tucked into pouches, carried into temples, and popped discreetly before greetings. And as you walk away, you realize something simple yet oddly profound. No matter how grand the empire, sometimes the real magic lies in the tiny details. The rhythm of grinding stones, the sheen of honey in lamplight, and the quiet care poured into a single ball of sweetness.
The trays of sticky pellets have hardened by morning, and the workshop smells faintly of spice and smoke as the city stirs to life. You drift along the street, following the faint clatter of footsteps and voices, until you find yourself at a courtyard where people sit cross-legged, rolling tiny balls between their palms. The process seems almost meditative, like making bread rolls or prayer beads. This is the next stage, the pill-rolling sessions. Honey and spice mixtures that were ground and kneaded last night are now portioned out, pinched into clumps, and rolled smooth. Each one is laid carefully on reed mats to finish drying under the desert sun. The mainstream historical fact here is straightforward. Egyptians shaped many of their medicinal and cosmetic preparations into pills or pellets, sometimes sealing them in little packets or jars. The habit of rolling medicine into swallowable or chewable balls goes back thousands of years. It wasn't invented by modern pharmacies. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that the Egyptians deliberately rolled these mints into round shapes to mirror the perfection of the sun disk. After all, roundness carried symbolic weight here. Wholeness, eternity, the cycle of Ra's daily journey across the sky. So, even a humble breath mint might echo cosmic symbolism. Still, historians argue whether these mints were more uniform in elite households or if everyday folks made them haphazardly. Would a queen's mint ball look neat and polished, while a fisherman's looked like a sticky pebble? The evidence is slim, leaving room for you to picture both ends of the spectrum. You watch as an elderly woman rolls hers with almost ceremonial grace, dipping her fingers in water to keep the honey from clinging. A boy beside her struggles, muttering as his misshapen lump sticks to his palm. The laughter that follows feels timeless,
ancient people teasing each other over clumsy handiwork, just as you'd mock a lopsided cookie today. First joke. Imagine biting into one of those misshapen lumps, only to find it glued to the roof of your mouth. No escape until it dissolves. Congratulations! You've invented the world's first caramel disaster. The courtyard hums with chatter as neighbors stop by to collect a handful of pellets for the day. They tuck them into linen pouches, sometimes embroidered, sometimes plain. You notice how casually it happens, like someone today pocketing a stick of gum before heading out. There's no ceremony here, just quiet practicality. Second joke. You picture a harried father rushing out the door, realizing halfway down the street he's forgotten his mint pouch, and groaning, "Great, now everyone will know I had garlic for breakfast." The sun climbs higher, and the mats of drying pellets gleam faintly in the light. Some crack slightly, exposing gritty herbs inside, while others keep their sheen. Children eye them with curiosity, but adults shoo them away. These are not candy, they insist. Still, you can imagine a few kids sneaking a taste when no one's looking. And here's the third joke. One mischievous boy pops a pellet into his mouth, expecting sweetness, only to spit it out seconds later, sputtering at the overpowering resin flavor. Lesson learned: don't steal medicine disguised as candy. As you drift away from the courtyard, you notice the rhythm of life around you. Men haul baskets of fish from the Nile. Women trade onions and leeks at the market. Scribes carry scrolls to the temple. And somewhere in almost every pouch or pocket, a sticky little sphere waits, ready to rescue its owner from culinary regret. The act of rolling, drying, and pocketing these pellets seems simple, but to you it feels like a ritual of care, a way of preparing for the day ahead, like brushing teeth or brewing coffee. It's a moment of pause, a gesture towards social harmony, and a reminder that even empires were built one small sticky ball at a time. The courtyard fades behind you, the sound of rolling hands softening into the hum of daily life. The Nile glitters in the distance, carrying whispers of trade and travel. But for now, you hold in your palm a single honey spice pellet, round, imperfect, and oddly comforting.
The morning sun has now brightened into midday, and you find yourself wandering toward the towering walls of a temple complex. The closer you get, the more you notice that temples aren't just religious spaces. They're also laboratories, clinics, and, in a sense, pharmacies of the ancient world. If you thought your local dentist's office smelled strongly of antiseptic, wait until you step into a room filled with incense, honey, and chalky powders. Inside, priests glide about in spotless white linen, their heads shaved smooth, their bodies washed several times a day in sacred pools. They aren't just spiritual leaders, they're also healers, surgeons, and yes, the closest thing Egyptians had to dentists. It's here you see the curious overlap, a priest chanting prayers while also handing out pellets for bad breath. Imagine your modern dentist reciting hymns while polishing your teeth. The mainstream historical fact is clear. In ancient Egypt, medical practice was closely tied to temple life. Priests studied medical papyri, memorized recipes, and dispensed remedies that blended science and magic. Dentistry was part of this world, with treatments ranging from drilling abscesses to prescribing mouth rinses made of natron and herbs. But here's the quirky tidbit. One ancient papyrus suggests using ground donkey hooves mixed with honey as a dental cure. Whether that was effective or just symbolic, you can only guess, but you probably wouldn't want to test it on your molars. And now the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether priests genuinely understood the medical benefits of their remedies, or whether these treatments were seen mainly as charms backed by divine power. Was honey chosen because it's antibacterial, or because it was considered a sacred food of the gods? Probably both. You pause to watch a priest at work. He leans over a patient who looks distinctly uncomfortable, holding his jaw with one hand and groaning softly.
The priest murmurs a prayer to Thoth, patron of wisdom, while smearing a paste of herbs and honey onto a cloth. The patient bites down, grimacing, while the priest assures him this will sweeten the mouth. You're not sure whether to call it medicine or a placebo, but the act itself carries weight, both spiritual and social. Here comes joke number 1. Imagine sitting in that chair, nervously waiting, only for the priest to tell you, "Don't worry, this might sting a little for the next 3 days." The temple smells rich, incense smoldering, oils warming, a faint tang of natron from the purification baths. To you, it's a blur of sweetness and smoke, but to Egyptians, this was order made tangible. Even bad breath was a kind of disorder, and a pellet of honey and spice could bring harmony back to right. Joke number 2, you think about modern dental drills and suddenly appreciate that, for all the pain, at least your dentist doesn't insist on shaving your entire body before an appointment. The priests keep careful records on scrolls, lists of ingredients, measurements, instructions. Some are practical, others bewildering. Was crocodile dung really prescribed for breath, or did some bored scribe slip in a prank to test his apprentice's patience? Historians still argue, but you can almost imagine a young trainee being dared, "Here, chew this for the gods." Joke number 3, imagine bragging at a banquet, "Yes, I'm blessed with divine favor and donkey hoof toothpaste." Not exactly a conversation starter. But beyond the jokes, you sense the seriousness of it all. To Egyptians, healing wasn't just about curing symptoms. It was about restoring balance, ma'at, between the body, the spirit, and the cosmos. A foul-smelling mouth wasn't just unpleasant. It might indicate decay, imbalance, or even divine displeasure. The priests were guardians of harmony, whether through chants or sticky pellets. As you step out of the temple, the light blinds you for a moment, and the clamor of the city comes rushing back. Children play in the dust, women carry jars of water balanced on their heads, and somewhere in the crowd a man discreetly pops a mint pellet before speaking with a scribe. The temple's quiet gravity lingers, though, the sense that even the smallest remedies carried a sacred echo. You take a slow breath, half expecting it to smell of honey and cinnamon, and smile at the thought. The priests might not have known about bacteria or cavities in the way modern science does, but they knew that sweetness and fragrance could ease discomfort, inspire confidence, and smooth social exchanges. And really, isn't that all most people still want from their dentists today?